Rick Ross deleted a photograph at 3 in the morning, and Rick Ross deleted the wrong one, not the pool shot. The pool shot is still sitting on the grid right now. Green water, Miami sun bouncing off the chain, caption talking about luxury and a new album. The pool shot survived everything. The wrist survived nothing. Somewhere between the post going live and the sun coming up over Star Island, one image quietly walked off the timeline. No announcement, no statement, no press release. Just a square that existed at midnight and stopped existing by breakfast, and roughly 400 people already had the screenshot saved before the delete button finished loading. This is not the mansion video, not the jet video, not the 235 acres in Georgia with the lake and the 60,000 square feet, and the tractor with air conditioning inside the cab. Every channel on this platform already made that video. Every one of those videos end the same way, with a drone shot and a string section swelling underneath, like the story has a happy ending stapled to the back of the folder. This one runs the other direction. Tonight, we are not auditing what Rick Ross showed you. Tonight, we are auditing what Rick Ross removed. And stay locked in, because once the method lands, every celebrity account on that phone in your hand changes shape permanently, and there is no going back to watching a feed the innocent way. Everybody studies a flex. Nobody studies a deletion. And the deletion is the only piece of evidence in the entire building that cannot lie to you, because a grown man with lawyers on retainer and a publicist on speed dial does not reach for the delete button unless something that frame already told the truth in public, out loud, in front of witnesses, with the timestamp attached. So here's what this video actually is. Call it the deletion ledger. 3 exhibits. All 3 logged inside a single calendar quarter. All 3 removed from public view by the same set of hands. And when the 3 exhibits get laid side by side on the same table, in the correct order, the picture that assembles itself is not a rap story at all. The picture that assembles itself is a portrait of a man standing inside a fortress, walking the walls at night with a flashlight, checking the same gate for the 9th time, because a fortress is only ever built by somebody who remembers exactly what the wrong side of the wall smells like at dinner time. Exhibit 1 is a watch that 2 people on Earth are supposed to own. Exhibit 2 is an airplane seat with a stranger in the next row. Exhibit 3 is a tour flyer with a coupon attached to it, and that coupon is going to hurt more than the other 2 combined. Hold all 3. We are opening them in reverse, and we're going backwards to 20 years to find the exact moment the deleting started, because the deleting did not start in 2025. The deleting started in 2008 with a photograph of uniform, and everything since then has been the same reflex, wearing a nicer watch. One more thing before the first exhibit opens. This is not a hit piece. Nobody here is dancing on a grave, because there is no grave. Rick Ross is wealthy. Rick Ross is working. Rick Ross is still selling out rooms in cities where the accent sounds nothing like Carol City. The catalog is real. The Wingstop payroll is real. The lake on the property is real and has fish in it. The question on the table tonight is smaller and meaner than any of that. The question is what a man does at 3 in the morning when nobody is filming, and whether that answer matches a man who shows up on the podcast at 2 in the afternoon with the robe on and the laugh already loaded. Because those 2 men have been living in the same body for 20 years. And this year, for the first time, the 2 of them started leaving different fingerprints. Comment section, do not answer yet. Hold the word. There is one word coming at the end of this, and I want the word earned, not guessed. Exhibit 1, July 2025. Rick Ross posts a picture floating in a pool. Standard operating procedure. 19 years of standard operating procedure. The water, the shoulders, the caption about pressing play on the new album, a date attached, set in stone, July 17th, all of it professionally lit and perfectly on brand from the color grade down to the font weight. And on the wrist, catching the sun at an angle that took somebody at least 3 tries to get right, an Audemars Piguet with green emerald that gets cut into the bezel. Now, 99% of the audience scrolls past that wrist. The wrist is wallpaper. The wrist is the same wrist from 2011 and 2016 and 2020, just with different stones in the setting. The average viewer registers expensive, registers boss, keeps scrolling toward the next thing that moves. But there is a 1% that does not scroll. The 1% that does not scroll is the watch community, and the watch community is the single most obsessive forensic unit operating on the internet today. And here's why that matters. Those people are not fans. Those people do not care about bars or streams or billboard placement. Those people care about reference numbers, serial ranges, production runs, and who physically holds which piece in which safe in which city. Within about 4 hours, a jeweler named Ben Baller looked at the wrist the way a gemologist tilts a stone under a loop, and Ben Baller said something very short and very specific in public. That model, in that configuration, was produced exactly twice. One in 37mm, one in 41mm. 2 pieces. That is the entire population of that watch on this planet. And Ben Baller said plainly that Ben Baller personally knows both owners by first name. Rick Ross is not on that list. Sit with the size of that for a second, because the size of that is the entire video. That is not a hater in the comments typing in all caps. That is not a blog aggregating a rumor from another blog. That is inventory. That is a man in the actual supply chain holding the actual client list, saying the population of this object is 2, and the 2 are accounted for, and neither of the 2 is standing in that pool. There is no comeback for inventory. A rapper can out-rap a diss. A rapper can out-earn a lawsuit. A rapper can outlast a news cycle by simply refusing to blink for 11 days. Nobody has ever out-argued a serial number. So watch what happens next, and watch it closely, because this is the exact fingerprint the entire ledger is built on. The pool shot stays up. The wrist shot disappears. Not the account. Not the caption, not the album promo, which was the entire commercial reason the post existed in the first place. 1 frame, surgically removed, sometime in the dark, while the rest of the rollout kept marching forward like nothing happened. That is not carelessness. Carelessness deletes the whole post. That is triage. That is a man in a dark room with a phone 6 inches from a face, zooming in on a photograph Rick Ross posted, checking the angle, checking the bezel, checking whether the light caught the thing that the jeweler already caught, and then making a business decision at an hour when no business decision has ever improved anybody's life. And the second that decision got made, the entire 20-year architecture developed a hairline crack running straight up the middle of the load-bearing wall. Because here's the part that hurts, and I want this said with zero venom in the voice. Nobody outside of maybe 900 people on Earth would have ever known or cared. The watch could have stayed up forever. The overwhelming majority of the audience cannot tell an Audemars from an Aldi special, and the ones who were mostly not going to bother typing anything. The deletion is what made the watch a story. The deletion is what took a specialist observation and turned that observation into evidence. Because an innocent man leaves a picture up and posts a receipt. An innocent man posts a box. An innocent man posts the papers, the certificate, the boutique invoice, and captions it with 2 words and a laughing emoji. And the story dies before lunch on a Tuesday with the jeweler looking silly in front of the entire industry. Instead, the frame vanished. And vanishing is a confession that never has to open its mouth. Exhibit 1, logged. Exhibit 2, the airplane. This one is more human. And honestly, this one is where sympathy starts creeping in around the edges, whether you want sympathy there or not. Photos surface of Rick Ross on a commercial flight. Not a hangar shot. Not a tarmac shot with the stairs down and the sunset behind the tail. A seat. A row, regular pressurized air being breathed by regular people with carry-on bags in the overhead compartment above. Rick Ross flies to Colombia to link with Trick Daddy, and the photos come home before the plane does. Now, the explanation arrives quickly, and the explanation is genuinely reasonable. The Gulfstream G550 is down for an upgrade, Starlink installation, satellite internet in the sky. Roughly $500,000 in the invoice, a real thing that real owners of real aircraft really do. And the downtime for that kind of work is measured in weeks, not hours. Here's the problem with the explanation. The commercial photos had already leaked twice before the Starlink explanation ever entered the conversation. Twice. Before. The explanation arrives as a response, not as a heads up. And a response is always a weaker document than a heads up in every court, in every room, in every relationship on Earth. Because a heads-up is volunteered and the response is extracted. The plane was never the problem. Flying commercial is not a scandal. And any working adult watching this right now has flown commercial this year and slept fine afterward. The problem is the sequence. Leak. Silence. Leak again. Explanation. Then, quietly, the disappearance of the images from every surface Rick Ross controls. That is Exhibit 2. And Exhibit 2 is the same fingerprint as Exhibit 1. Pressed into different clay. Something true entered the public record. The true thing did not match the brochure, and the brochure won the argument by removal instead of by proof. Exhibit 3. The flyer. Set in stone tour. Cities on the map. Dates in the graphic. Everything looking like every tour graphic that has ever been posted by anybody with a 12 studio album and a legacy catalog behind them. Then the promotion appears. Buy 1, get 1. 2 for 1 tickets. In markets that were supposed to move on the strength of the name alone. Markets that have been paying to see Rick Ross, since poor Miami went #1 on the Billboard 200 in 2006 was somewhere around 187,000 units in the opening week. And Drake, still carrying bruises from a summer nobody in that camp will ever fully recover from, sees a report and posts about the discount before the sun finishes going down. Now the flyer comes off the grid. 3 exhibits. 1 quarter. Watch plain flyer. Removed, removed, removed. 3 deletions inside 90 days is not a rough patch. 3 deletions inside 90 days is a maintenance schedule falling behind on a building that requires constant work to keep standing. And that is the actual thesis of this entire video. So write the thesis down, because everything from here forward is proof of the thesis. The boss image was never a problem. The upkeep on the boss image is the problem. Every image, once built, requires a technician. Somebody has to keep the paint fresh, the story straight, the receipts matched, the timeline clean, the chains rotating, the cars entering the driveway on schedule. That job never ends, and that job never pays out. And when the technician gets tired, when the technician turns 49 years old and starts wanting to sleep at night, the image starts glitching in public. You have now seen 3 glitches. So the real question stops being whether the watch was real. The real question becomes why a man who owns 200 cars, an actual lake, a 9-figure catalog, 25 Wingstop locations with real payroll and real inventory, and real drive-through lines wrapping around strip malls, would ever need a watch on a wrist to be the rarest one on earth in the first place. And to answer that, we have to go all the way back, past the mansions, past the label, past the first hit record, to a boy standing on a sidewalk in Carroll City, looking across the street at a life on the other side of an invisible line. Because that stare is the engine. Everything else is bodywork. Clarksdale, Mississippi, January 28th, 1976. William Leonard Roberts II arrives in a town where the blues were literally invented, in a state that has produced more American music per capita than anywhere on the continent. And the family does not stay long enough for Mississippi to leave much of a fingerprint on the accent. Carroll City, Florida. That is where the story actually begins. Now, people hear Miami and think one thing. Miami is not one thing. Miami is 2 cities wearing the same name and sharing the same weather and pretending not to see each other at red lights. One Miami has marble floors and rooftop pools shaped like punctuation marks and yachts sitting in slips that cost more per month than most people's mortgages. That Miami has valet parking and private elevators and a doorman who knows your dog's name. The other Miami has boarded windows and empty lots with grass growing through the concrete and grandmothers praying loud enough that the whole block hears an amen come to the screen door on a Sunday morning. Rick Ross grew up in the second one, walking home from school past the first one, every single day for years. Past houses that Rick Ross could not enter. Past cars Rick Ross could not touch. Past a version of life that existed roughly 400 yards away and might as well have existed on the surface of another planet with different physics and a different alphabet. That walk home is the origin story, not the record deal, not the label, the walk. Because a childhood spent looking through a fence does something specific to the wiring, and the specific thing it does is this. It installs a permanent alarm system. The alarm does not turn off when the money arrives. The alarm does not turn off when the house arrives. The alarm asks one question every morning for the rest of that person's life. And the question is, am I still inside, or did somebody move me back outside while I was sleeping? Hold on to that alarm. That alarm is going to explain the watch, the flyer, the plane, the podcast run, the disc record, and every 3 in the morning deletion in the ledger. High school arrives and something unexpected happens. Rick Ross is genuinely good at football. Not participation good. Not photograph on the wall good. Scholarship good. Albany State University in Georgia puts an offer on the table, and in Carroll City, that piece of paper is not a piece of paper. That piece of paper is a helicopter landing in the front yard. That is the exit. That is the thing every kid under Friday Night Lights is chasing while the whole neighborhood watches from aluminum bleachers. And then Rick Ross walks away from it. School stops making sense. The classroom starts feeling like a room somebody else designed for somebody else's son. And music starts talking louder than any coach in any locker room ever managed to. So the scholarship gets left on the table like a plate nobody finished. And here's the crack in the marble that never makes a highlight reel, that never gets mentioned in the interviews, that no biopic will ever spend a scene on. Before there was a Teflon Don, before there was an MMG chain, before there was a Louis Vuitton robe, Rick Ross was a college dropout with a duffel bag of notebooks, a hand-me-down car, and not one single line of a plan written down anywhere on paper. That is not a criticism. That is context. Because a man who leaves the only guaranteed exit behind has to build a new exit with bare hands. And a man who builds an exit with bare hands never fully trusts that the exit will still be there tomorrow. Now comes a chapter that changed everything, and I want this told carefully, because the chapter itself is not the scandal. What happened after the chapter is the scandal. Between 1995 and 1997, Rick Ross put on a uniform, not a chain, not a robe, a corrections officer uniform at the South Florida Reception Center in Dade County. Clock in at sunrise, clock out at dusk, modest state paycheck, benefits, a badge. Rick Ross worked inside the exact system that Rick Ross would later spend 2 decades rapping about outrunning. And now the hard part. That job is not shameful. Let that be said clearly and without any wink attached. That is a job. That is a young man in the early 20s with no scholarship, no degree, no plan, and probably a grandmother who needed groceries, taking honest employment inside a state facility because the rent does not care about your dreams. Nothing about that job would have ended anybody's career. What ended up in the walls of the career was the denial. The photograph leaks in 2008. Rick Ross in a uniform, badge visible, young face, whole chapter of a life sitting there in one frame. And Rick Ross says the photograph is fake, says the picture is doctored, says it on camera to journalists more than once, looking directly into a lens, denying an entire section of a life like the section can be edited out of a master file if enough people get told loudly enough that the section never existed. Then the smoking gun publishes the paperwork, employment records, hire date, salary figures, resignation date, everything lined up in a column like a receipt printed by a machine that has no opinion about your feelings and no financial interest in your brand. And that, right there, is the pebble that has been in the shoe for 18 years and counting. Because the arithmetic on this is brutal and simple. Walk outside on day one, look at the cameras, say, listen, I was 20 years old, I needed the money, my people needed groceries, so what? And the entire story is dead by Friday. Instead, the chapter got denied. And a denial is a gift. A denial is a free swing handed to every rapper on the planet, permanently, with no expiration date, printed anywhere on the coupon. 50 Cent smelled it before the ink dried, because smelling blood and water is the single most refined skill in that man's entire toolkit. Officer Ricky arrives. Full production. This record, video, cartoon, marketing pushed behind it like a label single. The nickname sticks like superglue on a fingertip. 3 syllables. Officer Ricky. And for the next 15 years, every single person who ever wanted to take a shot at Rick Ross starts in the same place, because the door is already open and nobody ever bothered to close it. Meanwhile, the music keeps talking about kilos and boat plugs and connects, while a photograph of Rick Ross guarding inmates floats around the internet forever like a ghost that refuses to log off, showing up in every comment section under every post for a decade and a half. Same reflex as the watch. Same exact reflex. Something true surfaces. The true thing does not match the brochure. And instead of absorbing it, the reflex says make it disappear. 2008. The reflex says the photograph is fake. 2025. The reflex says the wrist shot is gone. 17 years apart. Identical muscle memory. That is not a coincidence. That is a personality. And there was a second name problem that most people have completely forgotten about, which is somehow even heavier than the first one. There was already a Rick Ross. The original. Freeway Rick Ross. The actual man, serving actual federal time on what was originally a life sentence, sitting in a cell while a young rapper in Florida picks a stage name off a documentary and starts building an empire on top of it. The real Freeway Rick Ross fights the sentence down to 20 years and comes home in 2009. And the first thing waiting on the outside is a lawsuit. $10 million, filed June 18, 2010, in California federal court. The argument is not complicated. The name belongs to the man who actually lived a life, and somebody else is monetizing it. That case grinds for 4 years. Choose through interviews. Choose through headlines. Choose through every single conversation about Rick Ross and authenticity in every barbershop in America. In 2014, the court rules for the rapper, on First Amendment grounds, artistic expression protected, case closed. Legally, a clean win. Genuinely, that is a real legal victory with real precedent attached. Culturally, the dent never buffs out, because now there are 2 men with the same name in the same room, and only one of them can produce documentation for where the name came from. Now, credit where credit is owed, and it is owed heavily. The music was not a costume. The music was real, and the music was enormous. Hustlin' in 2006 did not enter the room. Hustlin' kicked the room's door off the hinges. That J.R. Rodham beat. That hook that landed somewhere between a warning siren and a silk sheet. That opening bar that was coming out of every car window in Miami within a single weekend. That record was a regional weather event. Poor Miami, #1 on the Billboard 200, around 187,000 units in the first week. Def Jam looked at Rick Ross the way you look at a gold coin found under a couch cushion you were about to donate. Then Teflon Don in 2010, carrying BMF and Aston Martin music, an album people still argue is a top-tier body of work in the entire decade. God Forgives, I Don't in 2012. Mastermind in 2014, a run of major label albums where the floor never dropped out. And Maybach Music Group turns into an actual factory floor. Meek Mill, Whale, French Montana, Amarien, Stally, all under One Eagle logo, all eating, all charting. For a stretch of years there, Rick Ross ran the South the way Diddy ran the East Coast in the 90s. Untouchable, unbothered, uncounted, unstoppable. Then the businesses arrive, and the boss image goes fully nuclear. 25 Wingstop locations across the Southeast. Not endorsements. Ownership. Real payroll. Real inventory. Real managers calling about the Friar being down on a Saturday. Checkers and Rally's franchises stacked on top of that. Belaire champagne money coming in from bottle service in every club in Atlanta and Miami. Bumbu rum money from every liquor shelf between Florida and Houston. A wellness company. Books with actual publishers, not vanity presses. And then the compound. 235 acres in Georgia. 109 rooms. 60,000 square feet. A private lake with fish in it. A garage that looks like a Bentley dealership on a Saturday afternoon. Rick Ross named it the Promised Land, and that name is the most honest thing in this entire story. A word chosen by a man who is not describing real estate, a man who is describing the far side of that invisible line from Carol City. 3 housing projects worth of square footage stacked on one piece of grass, plus enough room for a couple football fields, and Rick Ross out front on a John Deere tractor with air conditioning a cab and tinted glass and a radio inside. Cutting the Rick Ross lawn personally, laughing like a man who solved the neighborhood problem permanently by becoming the entire neighborhood himself. But somewhere in the middle of all the winning, the Reebok moment happens, and nobody wants to replay that tape. A guest verse on Rocco's UNO drops in 2013. One line inside that verse lands so wrong that the internet stops scrolling mid-thumb. Advocacy groups mobilize inside days. Reebok, the brand paying Rick Ross to be the face of an entire men's line, cuts the deal clean off the bone. No press conference. No 48-hour cooling period. No negotiated exit. Gone. An apology comes. The storm eventually passes. The albums keep coming. But that Reebok logo never returns to a Rick Ross anything ever again. And from that day forward, every brand that signs Rick Ross has that memory sitting quietly in the risk column of the paperwork, priced in, never discussed out loud in the meeting. Now here is where every other Rick Ross video on this platform hits the brakes and rolls credits. Every other retrospective gives you the tractor, the jets, the chains, the acreage, the Wingstop count, the swelling strings, and a closing line about the boss winning against the odds. We are not stopping there, because the deletion ledger is still open, and the ledger has a 4th column that nobody has filled in yet. That 4th column is Drake. And the Drake column is where the whole ledger stops being about money and starts being about something a lot older and a lot more expensive than money. Most people think they understand the Drake situation. Most people do not, because most people are watching the punches and not the calendar. Drake and Rick Ross were not casual collaborators who happened to share a producer twice. Drake and Rick Ross were structural to each other. Stay Schemin', Aston Martin Music, Diced Pineapples, Free Spirit, Lemon Pepper Freestyle. That is not a features list. That is a decade of somebody picking up the phone every time the phone rang. In an industry where loyalty spoils faster than fruit left on a countertop in August, Rick Ross put Drake in front of Miami before Miami had decided whether Miami was going to accept a Canadian kid on a Toronto label. Rick Ross opened doors that had no reason to open, vouched in rooms where a vouch actually cost something, and gave that career a Southern passport at the exact moment that career needed one. Then 2024 arrives, and Future and Metro Boomin drop an album stacked with shots at Drake on nearly every other track. And the entire industry has to pick a side inside about 72 hours. Rick Ross picks. And the side Rick Ross picks is not the side a decade of studio nights would have predicted. Drake responds on push-ups. 1 bar aimed at Rick Ross. 1 bar. And that bar goes directly precisely into the soft spot that has been guarded since 2008. Officer Ricky. 18 years later, and the same three syllables still cut clean to the titanium plating like the plating was never installed. Think about what that means for a second. Not the insult, the engineering of the insult. Drake did not have to research anything. Drake did not have to dig. The wound was public, permanent, and pre-installed by the denial itself back in 2008. Every attacker for 18 years has been using the same door because Rick Ross built the door and then insisted the door was not there. And Rick Ross responds with champagne moments in under 48 hours. 48 hours. Studio to streaming. Now, let us be precise about what that record actually was. Because the speed is a tell. Nose job jokes. Hairline jokes. Bodywork jokes. Fast, personal, physical, and almost entirely uninterested in music. Here is a detail that got missed in real time, and it is the most revealing detail in the entire feud. Rick Ross had never made a diss record like that in a 20-year catalog. Never. The historical Rick Ross approach to conflict is patient, slow, months of positioning, subliminals on album cuts, a bar buried in verse 3 that people find in November about something that happened in March. Chess with a discography. That day, chess got put away. That day the response was uno, draw for, slapped down flat on the table by somebody who did not want to wait one more hour to feel something. 3 weeks later, Kendrick Lamar drops Not Like Us, and the culture picks a winner in a single weekend. And the entire summer takes a shape that nobody in Toronto is ever fully recovering from. Here is what has not happened. The victory lap never ends. Podcasts, live streams, playing Drake vocals mute in the club while the beat keeps running underneath. So the crowd sings a hook into an empty microphone. Reading Drake fan comments out loud on camera to a laughing entourage. Jokes about a plane. Reels. Appearances. 12 months. Then more than that, and this is the exact place where the alarm from Carol City becomes visible to the naked eye, because a man who won does not need to keep re-announcing the score. Fat Joe sat directly next to Rick Ross on a podcast and said out loud that Fat Joe does not understand why the swings are still coming this long after the referee waved the fight off. Jadakiss just blinked and sipped a drink and said nothing, which from Jadakiss is an entire paragraph. When a boss keeps punching after the bell, the room stops seeing a boss. The room starts seeing a man who needed that particular win more than the win was worth, and who is now afraid of what the silence sounds like when the crowd stops laughing. And now connected to the ledger, the victory lap and the deletions are the same behavior, wearing two different outfits. The deletion removes evidence that contradicts the brochure. The victory lap adds evidence that supports the brochure. Subtract the bad. Add the good. Repeat every 7 days forever. That is not a career strategy. That is content moderation performed by a man on a whole life, 24 hours a day, with no days off and no vacation policy. And the schedule on that job is inhumane. Every mansion eventually requires a bigger mansion. Every jet requires a longer jet. Every watch requires a rarer watch, until the rarest watch in the world has a population of 2, and you are still not on the list. That is the moment the maintenance schedule broke. Not because of a jeweler, because there was nowhere left to escalate to. Now, look at the counter-argument honestly, because a real analysis has to survive the strongest version of the other side. The other side says this is a normal rich man having a normal year. Watches get borrowed all the time in that world, and borrowing is not fraud. Planes go into maintenance. Tours discount in soft markets, and always have, in every genre, including stadium acts you would never question. Artists delete posts constantly for 100 reasons that have nothing to do with guilt, including bad lighting, and a typo in a caption. Every single one of those points is fair, taken alone. The problem is that none of them are alone. One deletion is a Tuesday. 2 deletions is a coincidence. 3 deletions, all in the same quarter, all pointing at the same 3 pillars the brand is built on, wealth, mobility, and demand, is a pattern with a heartbeat. Watch, plane, flyer, rich, mobile, wanted. Those are not 3 random things. Those are the load-bearing walls of the entire cathedral. And all 3 got quietly patched in 90 days by the same set of hands at hours when normal people are unconscious. And there is one more entry in the ledger that nobody has connected from way back in 2022. Gilly the Kid pulled the corrections officer receipts back into the timeline in the middle of an argument that was about something else entirely. And Rick Ross barely swung back. At the time, that silence read as maturity. Grown man energy. Above the noise. In hindsight, that silence reads completely differently. That silence reads like ammunition being conserved by somebody who already knew a bigger fight was coming down the road, and who had already done a math on how many rounds were left in the magazine. 2 years later, Drake picks up those same 3 syllables, dresses them in a better beat, and the entire industry sings along on the first listen. That is not coincidence. That is water damage on a ceiling that started leaking long before anybody in the room looked up. So now let us do the thing this whole video has been building toward. Let us run the ledger forward instead of backward. And let us use the ledger as a lens instead of as a scoreboard, because the lens is what you actually get to keep after this video ends. Here is the method. 3 rules. Portable to any account on your phone. Rule 1. Track the deletion, never the post. The post is marketing. The post had a team, a color grade, a caption written twice, and approved by somebody with a title. The post is a press release with better lighting. The deletion had nobody. The deletion happened in a dark room, alone, on a phone, at an hour when no adult makes good decisions. The deletion is the only unmediated communication a public figure ever sends you, which means when something disappears from a feed, the correct question is never what did that say. The correct question is what did that prove. Rule 2. Measure the gap between an event and the explanation of the event. If the explanation arrives before the evidence, that is a person telling you their life. If the explanation arrives after the evidence, twice, that is a person managing your perception of their life. The Starlink explanation for the Gulf Stream is completely believable and could be entirely true. It arrived third. Leak explanation. Order of operations is the whole discipline. In every relationship, in every courtroom, in every boardroom you will ever sit in, the volunteered fact and extracted fact carry different weights, and everybody involved knows it even when nobody says it. Rule 3. Count the escalations per calendar quarter. A person who is genuinely at rest posts about the work. A person who is not at rest posts about the rivals, the receipts, the doubters, and the score. And the tell is the ratio. So here's the actual homework. And this is where the video stops being about Rick Ross and starts being about how you look at everything. Next Rick Ross interview that lands. Do 3 counts on a piece of paper. Count 1. How many times does a rival's name come out of mouth before a single song from a new album gets mentioned? If a rival's name arrives first, the album is not the product. The rivalry is a product, and the album is a receipt for the rivalry. Count 2. How many times does the word real appear in one sentence? Real ones. Real money. Real streets. Keep real. Watch the frequency. Because the word real is a load-bearing word for people who are being asked constantly to prove something that a genuinely settled man never gets asked about at all. Count 3. Time to laugh. Watch whether the laugh lands on a joke or lands one full beat behind the joke. A laugh that arrives on time is a reaction. A laugh that arrives late is a decision. And a decision to laugh is one of the loneliest things a human being can do on camera in front of millions of people. Run those 3 counts, and you will know more about the state of that man than any documentary, any interview, any billboard chart, and any comment section on this platform. And now, the closing thought, and I want to bring the temperature all the way down for this part, because this is the part that actually matters. There are 3 lessons buried in this, and not one of them has anything to do with rap. Lesson 1. If the truth is small, own the truth in daylight before somebody else prints it at night. A 4-month stretch as a corrections officer never buried a single human being in this industry. Not one. That job is honest work, and the culture would have digested it in a weekend, made 9 jokes, and moved on before the next Friday release schedule. A 15-year denial buried a legacy in slow motion, one comment section at a time, for 18 years and counting. The size of a secret is never what damages a person. The energy spent guarding the secret is what does the damage, because that energy comes out of the same account that would have paid for peace. Lesson 2. The image you build becomes rent, and rent is due monthly for the rest of your life. Every asset you display becomes a minimum standard you now have to maintain forever in public, in front of people who are keeping score with better memories than yours. Every mansion requires a bigger mansion. Every jet requires a longer jet. Every watch requires a rarer watch. And the day one detail slips out of frame, the whole cathedral starts creaking simultaneously, from the pews all the way up to the steeple, and everybody in the building hears at once. Lesson 3. And this one is the expensive one. Silence is a flex nobody teaches you in the streets. Rick Ross could have said absolutely nothing 9 times in a row and won the entire war by simply not showing up on the 10th Monday. The audience would have filled the silence with mythology, because audiences always do. Silence is the only marketing that costs nothing and appreciates over time. But silence reads a surrender to a person who was never allowed to be quiet growing up, in a house where quiet meant something bad was already happening in the next room. And that is the real story of Rick Ross in 2026. Not Drake, not 50 Cent, not Kendrick, not the charts. The real story is that Rick Ross did not build an empire. Rick Ross built a fortress. And a fortress, no matter how high the walls, no matter how deep the water in the moat, no matter how green the grass on all 235 acres of it, is only ever built by somebody who remembers, in exact detail, what it felt like to be standing outside the gate looking into the bars of somebody else's life. 12th studio album, set in stone, the mural, the countdown clips, the pool shots, the chains, the tractor cameos, all of it professional, all of it on brand from the palette to the font. And underneath every frame, the same quiet question, asked behind the same practice smile that has been worn for 2 decades. Do you still see the boss? Or do you finally see the boy from Carol City who is exhausted from proving it every single morning before breakfast? Rick Ross will never say that in an interview. Rick Ross does not have to. The deleted photograph already said it. In the loudest silence Rick Ross has ever posted to a public grid. Now the assignment. Comment section, 1 word. Not a paragraph. Not a discography thesis. 1 word. Boss or bluff. 2 words on the ballot. And only one of them can go on the stone. That is the entire assignment. And I read every single one of them, top to bottom. And I mean that literally. And if the legacy really is set in stone, understand what stone actually does. Stone keeps fingerprints. Stone keeps every hand that ever touched it forever. And there are going to be a lot of fingerprints on that particular slab before this year finishes. Once you notice the deleted wrist shot, once you notice the muted Drake vocals play in the club while the crowd sings into nothing, once you notice the tractor post landing on the same weekend as the private jet caption, you will never scroll past the Rick Ross square the same way again for the rest of your life on this app. And here's the part that should genuinely keep you here. The ledger is still open. There are 90 more days in this quarter. There's a tour still running, an album still charting, a rival still breathing, and a man who has now shown us 3 times in a row exactly what Rick Ross does when something true escapes in the public. So subscribe, because the 4th exhibit is coming, and unlike the first 3, we're going to catch that one live, in real time, the night it disappears. I want you sitting in this room when the receipts start printing themselves.